Hello, this is the second part of the Build Your Own Computer series of videos. We're going to be focusing on what parts you need and the kind of options you've got when purchasing. So let's just take a look at the typical components that a modern computer system has. I'm going to go old school with a pen. I don't really like PowerPoint because this is just much more productive for me to use this. So essentially you start off with a motherboard. Now the motherboard will have a place to put your processor, so CPU. It will have a place to put some RAM. It will have a place to put the graphics card or GPU. It will have places to put some storage, which I'll say is the HDD, hard disk drive. You can also add an optical drive if you want to. You might also have space for storage there as well, which I'll cover too. Now the processor will need a heatsink or HSF, heatsink and fan. And everything needs to be powered by a power supply unit. So you've got the motherboard, CPU with a fan, RAM, power supply, some kind of storage and a graphics card. And of course the most important thing that we've missed out so far is a case to put it all in. And that is essentially the parts that you need. Motherboards are all they're all the same and yet they're all different, which is not terribly helpful. But remember from the initial start of this, you've got processor with a heatsink on it, somewhere to put your RAM, somewhere to put your GPU, somewhere to put your storage and power supply connectors. So this is the core of it. This is where really we're going to start. We need to choose our flavour of processor, then we need to choose a motherboard to fit it in, and then we worry about everything else after that. So this is an example of basically one that's come out of an old system, and for comparison I'll bring in the big boys, which essentially is this bad boy here, which is the Crosshair Dark Hero, which is the current sort of flagship that we're after. It's a bit of a beast. I've got to try and get it out without breaking it. So if we look at that in comparison, just chuck that on the floor, the rather substantial box. If we look at that in comparison, you can see that the layout is actually very, very similar in that everything is kind of in the same sort of places. So the difference in that is that this, you can probably pick up, you can get motherboards for like 40 quid. This is sort of like 500 quid. There are more expensive ones and there are obviously cheaper ones, but they are essentially the same in their layout. But what's very different about these two is this has got some pretty funky features for the new Ryzen, which is why it's rather special, but it's also got an M.2s, two M.2s, whereas this doesn't have any M.2s at all. It's just got your standard SATA. So that's the kind of sort of the extremes, if you like. So when you're choosing, you look at the processor you want, and then you go and find a motherboard to put it in, and then you worry about the RAM and everything else after that. So the key consideration really is, are you going Intel or AMD? Are you going for a small form factor, or are you going for a standard form factor? Because that reflects on the case as well. So you need to have, so there's quite a lot of things to think about, and actually the real difficulty isn't putting it together, isn't the building, isn't the assembling. The real difficulty is actually working out what bits you're actually going to buy to put together. And the key to that is setting your budget. So set your budget. For the purposes of this build your own, I'll set a budget of 500 quid, and I'll set a budget of 1,000. And we'll do 2 example sort of selections of parts, and we'll look at the variations and we'll see how we get on. So this is the motherboards. Next thing I'll have a look at is the processors. This is a Ryzen 5900X. That's about £500 or sort of 700. This box has got a bit squashed because they put it in an envelope when they sent it. That's a 12-core, 24-thread processor. That's pretty much sort of flagship without going industrial about things. This is an old i3, and that's an older i5. So there are, you've got options depending on how much money you want to spend. Now, in terms of gaming, obviously that's going to be nicer, but the i5 is actually quite good for gaming. It used to be that you could only get, games didn't use more than 2 cores, but now they're starting to branch out. So you need a processor that's got at least 4 cores to game effectively. Anything else that you're doing with it, if you're doing rendering, as mentioned in the introductory video, then the more cores the better. Because obviously they scale quite nicely with multi-core systems. With everything else, word processing, browsing the internet, checking your emails, you can get pretty much any processor you like. Any modern processor will do that. Don't forget that if you've already got a machine that you're looking to replace, that processor was, new at some stage, and it was considered good enough. And people have been typing on processors for the last 30, 40 years without too many complaints. So Word isn't really going to be that demanding on any system. So bear that in mind before you start splashing out. Define your needs is the important thing, which I'm going to keep mentioning. So yeah, processors. So after processors, it seems logical to do heat sinks and fans. What's interesting about a lot of the Intel processors is that they all tend to come with a stock cooler. This is also true for some AMD processors, but you'll need to check what you're ordering. But you can get the processor as a separate thing. This is a Wrath Prism, which is the one with the LEDs on. That was £20, just bought on its own. It comes with some processors, so when you're buying your processor, just see what it comes with. The K versions, the unlock versions, if that's what you're going for, they tend not to come with a cooler because they anticipate that you're going to be doing something else a bit more funky. So for example, the 5900X that I showed in the processor section, that doesn't come with a heatsink, even though it comes in the big box that a heatsink would fit into. You just get the bare processor. So you can then go a bit mad and sort of get something like that, which is the Kraken Z73, which is a bit funky. So that's about 250 quid, something like that. And then that was like 20, and that one was kind of sort of free in inverted commas with the processor. So when it comes to the cooling solution, if you want to keep the costs down, you buy a processor that comes with a fan. They're adequate. They won't really do overclocking, but they work. So you pay money and you take your choice. And if you want to have something a bit funky, you can spend more. And if you don't, you can spend less. So at the end of this, we'll look at a few sort of example systems and see where the costs can go and where we can reduce them. So following on from processors, you might have noticed that the stock coolers come with some thermal paste pre-applied, so you haven't got to worry about applying any paste. A lot of the all-in-one coolers, when you've got the radiator, the tubing and the sort of pump, that also comes with it pre-applied. Some of the larger coolers, like the Dark Rock Pro, things like that, they don't have it pre-applied, but you do get like a little tube of it to use. If you wanted to sort of spend a chunk of money, then obviously there are premium ones available. This is the Cryonaut Extreme. It's £80 for a little tiny pot of the stuff and some sort of spreaders. That's a bit excessive and largely pointless, but yeah, nonetheless it exists, so I thought I'd make you aware of it. You don't need to buy that. Either the thermal paste will be pre-applied, or you'll get a tube of it. You will get extra performance slightly, better thermal performance slightly, by buying a sort of a third-party tube of it, but it's unnecessary if it's your first build. That's sort of a refinement you can do later. So for RAM, there's quite a range of different products, as you can probably appreciate. This is probably the most confusing and bewildering aspect of you know, getting the parts ready to assemble your own PC. Which RAM do you buy? Well, you can get sort of vanilla sort of sticks like this one. This is a DDR4. It's a 4 gig single stick. It's 2400 megahertz. That's probably your sort of cheapest option. Or you can get something like this, which is Vengeance RGB Pro. This is DDR4 4000 megahertz. It's 2 kits to make 32 gig using all 4 slots. So those, and yeah, of course they do some Dominator ones. There's loads of other companies that make the RAM. So the choice of the RAM really is governed by how much you actually want, and then depending on which processor you get, matching the sort of frequency of that with what works best for the processor. This is slightly more confusing when you're dealing with the higher end Ryzen, especially the unlocked ones, but also similarly for the higher end Intel ones if they're unlocked, because then it starts to get into sort of a bit of a sort of fudgy grey area. But if you just want a computer that works, then I'll show you how to choose the RAM that's going to work, because it's actually easier than you think. So even though there's hundreds and hundreds of different sticks of RAM to choose from, I'll show you what, you know, the best way to choose if you're not really sure about what to get. So graphics cards, well, oh, yes, there are well, quite a lot to choose from. Pretty bewildering generally. Bottom of the range tends to be something like this. This is actually quite old. I don't think they even make this anymore. It's a GeForce 2010. So generally you list the graphics cards and arrange by price, and the most expensive one is the most powerful. That's actually passive cooling. I use that for testing. If you want to go absolutely berserk, at the time I made this video, then this is the kind of thing that you get, which is a 3090. This is the Palette Game Rock overclock version. That's about £1,700. So there is quite a severe range of prices and things like that. Here's a little secret. When you're deciding which graphics card to get, it's easy just to buy the most expensive one that you can find, or the most expensive one you can afford. But what's actually a bit sneaky is that you look at the native resolution of your monitor and you base your decision entirely on that. So if you've already got a monitor that you're reusing and it's, for example, HD, you look at the performance you need to get that running 1920 by 1080 at decent frame rates. And that doesn't involve one of these. You don't need a 3090 to game effectively on an HD resolution monitor. Far from it. So whilst, you know, money solves everything, where you spend the most money, you get the best sort of thing and covers everything, you can be a bit sneaky. So have a look at the native resolution you monitor, do a little bit of research to find out what the best GPU for that is, and that's the one you home in on, and you target that as being one that you're going to get. So this bit's out storage. Conventionally you've got 3.5 inch mechanical hard drive. This is a 4 terabyte Western Digital Barracuda. Obviously other capacities exist. The cheapest one's around about £40, something like that. There is a premium version of mechanical drives, and this one's a Western Digital Black. This is a 10 terabyte, so you can get very high capacities with the mechanical ones. This is about £250 for that one. After that, the SSDs make an appearance, and that's one here. This is a 2.5 inch Samsung drive, and you can see it's quite a bit smaller. It's 2.5 inches rather than 3. That's the 1 terabyte version. They do a 250, 500, a 1, and maybe even a 2. They're going to be about about 90, something like that, depending on what capacity it is. So it's, in terms of pounds per gigabytes, it's more expensive than the mechanical ones. Next step up is the M.2s, and we'll jump straight in at the deep end with that. This is the Sabrent Rocket 4 Plus. It's a 4TB version. This is currently one of the world's fastest M.2s. It's PCIe Gen 4. It's an absolute monster. That will cost you around about £800, £700 to £800. If it's capacity you're after for M.2s, then there's the Corsair MP400, which is going to cost you about £1,100 for 8 terabytes. So you can see that's 10 terabytes, that's 8 terabytes, that's like almost 4.5 times more expensive. So what you're paying for there is performance and capacity. That doesn't mean to say that you have to have one of these. You can mix and match. The sneaky trick is to get like a 250 gig SSD for your main operating system, and then a cheaper mechanical drive to give you the capacity to store your games on and things like that. Obviously, the more money you've got, the more towards this end you get. So, for example, you could have the Rocket 4 Plus as your main operating system drive, and then you could have the MP400 for your data. That's one option if you want to spend colossal amounts of money. That's almost £2,000 for that one solution there. Or you can do an M.2, a cheaper M.2, and a larger capacity 2.5 inch SSD. So there are some combinations. Again, this will depend on your budget though, won't it? Whatever your budget is, you sort of go towards that end, depending on how much, and the less you've got, you head towards that end. So power supplies, well, they vary for something like this, which is just a sort of, well, it's kind of not branded. It's got a model, but it's not, no one's put their name on it. So you can get a power supply for about 30 quid. In fact, you can get a case with a power supply in it for like 30 quid in some cases. Middle of the range sort of is like that, Pure Power 11, that's about £80. It's semi-modular. So that just means that you can, this one isn't modular at all, so all the connectors are all pre-wired. Semi-modular means that some of them can be plugged in, but usually the ATX and the power supply for the CPU, they're hardwired in. Higher end, we go to something like this, which is the Dark Power Pro 12. That's about £380. That's fully modular and a bit funky. Overkill for just about every system, apart from the really high-end ones. So that is about sort of £70–80. That's about sort of £30. Obviously there are a huge variety, so depending on your overall budget, it will depend on how much gets skewed towards the power supply. So far we've looked at the motherboard, the processor, thermal paste, RAM, graphics card, power supply, and some storage options. The last bit of the sort of component list I've deliberately left till last, because it's slightly different to the other components that I've mentioned already. The motherboard, processor, RAM, all the other components have got almost a symbiotic relationship, in that you can't, for example, put an Intel processor in an AMD motherboard, so you have to, there's a link there, and the RAM you choose is very much dependent on the processor you put in and what kind of processor it is and what speed it runs at. The graphics card also is, yeah, the power supply is linked to the graphics card. Storage options are obviously linked to the motherboard. You can't put an M.2 drive in if you haven't got an M.2 socket. That's an obvious thing to point out. So there's quite a relationship between the components that I've mentioned so far that doesn't actually apply to the case. So essentially, you can buy any case you like. You're not buying an OEM machine, you're building your own. The thing about OEM machines is that the manufacturing methods might be, there might be some cost cutting, so you might get a few sharp edges inside. That's less important now because of the way they're assembled. But back in the day, some cases were, you could cut yourself quite badly, which I think is a comment mentioned in the previous video, how they used to cut themselves when they were building using components from a certain company. So yeah, I've cut myself on cases in the past. Also, with OEM manufactured machines, you have ports on the front, and it would be a bit weird if the ports didn't work. So all the ports on the front have to work, and for some manufacturers that can, that can involve some fairly customized hardware internally and cabling internally that you can't do if you're building it yourself. And you don't have to do that anyway, because here's a really sort of key point. If you're not bothered about all the external connectors on the case working, then obviously you don't have to find a way to plug them all in. And to illustrate that is this first case that we're going to look at, and it's the Lianli PC011DXL, probably one of the best cases in the world at the moment. It's absolutely incredible for all sorts of different reasons, but it has a very interesting set of features, one of which is the number of USB ports it's got, because you've got 2 at the bottom, you've got another 2 USB 3s at the top of the front panel, but you've also got a USB-C as well. Right, so getting a motherboard that's got the connectors to make all those work as they're supposed to work is actually very difficult. So if you want to get all those ports working, you have to be a bit sneaky about what parts you buy. And if you don't care, because you're only going to use the top ones and you're not going to bother with the C, then obviously, so it doesn't really matter what you put in the case if you don't necessarily want all the bits of the case to work. Now, the thing is, this is a £210 case, and it's got more than the extra USB things. It's got hot swapping drive bays at the back, and its overall design is just pretty brilliant. There's space to mount radiators just about everywhere, so that's why it's a £205 case. Is it worth £205? Absolutely yes, without any doubt at all. You can put you can take a laptop apart and put it inside and call that a PC if you want. You can buy the case and put your old PC in it, take your old PC apart and put it in there, and so you can do all of that without actually having to. So the actual case is independent of its contents, is really what I'm trying to say. And some of the features that you get on the higher end ones, if you want them, are obviously going to be nice. But you kind of get what you pay for, and you don't, is what I'm trying to say with cases. So with the next one, which is the H500i, now it's the i because it's intelligent, because it's got like a fan controller and LED strip pre-wired, which is rather groovy, and it's actually wired in really nicely as well, really tidy. I've got an unboxing video for that. I'll put a link in the description so you can see what it's like. But that is a really nice little case. It's $100, so about 80-90 pounds, something like that, and it's got some really nice features. It's really easy to build with it. You're not going to cut yourself on that. There's no sharp edges. Manufacturers of cases have realized that if they also sell cases to the public by making them retail products, then obviously they sell more cases, so they don't want people getting injured by their cases, so they have refined it to the point where it's a retail product rather than just for OEMs. So this particular case is extremely well designed. It's extremely pleasing to look at. It's very easy to work with, and it's really solidly built. Next one is a VSK 3000 Elite, and that's from Antec. And again, it's a major brand. Antec are a major brand. They've been building cases for a long time. I've got an Antec, what's it called? Antec Solo in its original box on the floor down there, and that's ancient, and it's a fantastic case. And there's very little difference between that and this, to be honest. The main difference is the USB 2 ports, because this has got USB 3. That one, I think, has actually got original USB ports, not USB 2, even the original USB ones. So, but I could put my PC, I could take my PC apart and almost fit it inside, and you could build a standard PC in that case as well. So the actual case layouts aren't a problem. You're looking at the cost of it and the kind of features that you want. So this VSK 3000 Elite is very, very cheap, notice it's got a 5¼ inch drive bay and 3.5 inch drive bay. So if you've got a card reader or something, you can put that in. Your optical drives, you can put that in as well. If you don't care about optical drives, which is kind of the norm now, then the choice is obviously wider. But if you do, you're going to need to buy a case with one in. So, you know, if you want a DVD drive, choose a case that's got a slot for it. The last one I'm going to look at is a Cougar MG120G. Now, there's another unboxing video for this. There's one for the Antec VSK 3000 as well, so you can get a closer look at them. This case is astonishing. It's like 31 pounds or something. It's like 30 quid, and it's got a tempered glass side panel. The front bit's plastic, but you can't tell from the, you know, it looks, and it's really nice. And there were some issues with it, with the quality of it. The metal is a bit thin, but you know, for 30 quid, it's an absolute bargain. It really is an absolute bargain. So if you're looking for your first build and you want to SKU, and this is really what the key and sort of final thought for this particular video about the kind of parts that you can choose. This is the final thing I want to say. You can, with a PC that you build yourself, you can skew the budget to focus on the various components that you think are important for what you do. So if, for example, you have a finite budget of, say, £1,000 or something, and you want to get a slightly better graphics card, then rather than spending 200 quid on that, you could spend 30 on that and have another 170 quid to add to your GPU budget, which can make, well, it will make a massive difference to what GPU goes in. Now, that's the real reason you build it yourself. Because when you're buying an OEM machine, if you want, for example, a high-end GPU, they will tend to specify a high-end CPU, high-end RAM, and high-end motherboard, and high-capacity storage with that. So everything goes up on the same step as it goes up the same rung as it goes up the ladder. You don't get the GPU staying on the top step while the CPU starts climbing up. Everything kind of goes up. Now, obviously, when you've got the systems, the configuration systems where you can click the bits that you want, that's slightly different. You can sort of, but when you're buying a pre-built from the major manufacturers, a high-speed GPU usually goes hand in hand with a high-speed CPU and lots of RAM and a bigger, a big SSD. So when you're building it yourself, you can skew the budget into areas that are important to you, not what another company thinks are important to you. And if you don't want fans, you'll have to buy them. And of course, if you do want them, then you can then fit them at a later date, or you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, is what I'm saying. So now that's the end of this video. So you've got an idea of the components that you're going to have to buy. There's only like 9, and if you think about 9, that's 9 ingredients or 9 components is a bit like a Big Mac or something like that, or a club sandwich. Do you build a club sandwich or do you assemble it? You kind of assemble it, don't you? So remember, we're not the actual building bit of it, the actual assembly bit of it is actually quite easy and quite fun. And you can take your time over it as well. You're not doing it competitively. So that's the kind of fun bit. But that's neglected in these kind of videos where they don't really explain. They say, oh, I've got some parts, let's build it. Oh, you do this. They don't actually say how they chose the parts and what the tricks are and what the basically what the smart money does if they want to get a good PC without, an infinite budget. So I hope you found this video informative. The next video will actually look at choosing parts, putting them in your shopping basket, and all the issues with buying, purchasing, and also we'll cover returns as well in the next video. So if you found this video helpful, then give it a like, and liking and subscribing is appreciated. Any comments, stick them down below. I answer all the comments, and as ever, thanks for watching.